Is your voice being drowned out by those with deeper pockets? Right now, while you're watching this video, there are people in rooms you'll never see, making decisions that affect your life, your wallet, and your future. And most of us have no idea it's happening.
Let's start with the basics. What even is a lobbyist? Well, a lobbyist is someone hired by organizations, corporations, or special interest groups to influence government decisions on their behalf.
Sounds simple enough, right? But the reality is far more complex and far more pervasive than most people realize.
These aren't shady characters in dark alleys making backroom deals, though sometimes it feels that way.
They're often former politicians, staffers, or government officials who understand exactly how the system works because they used to be part of it. And that's the genius of it. They know the players, they know the process, and they know exactly which buttons to push. Here's the thing that most people don't understand. Lobbying itself isn't illegal. In fact, it's constitutionally protected. The First Amendment gives people the right to petition their government, and lobbying is technically just that. But the way it's practiced today has evolved into something that bears almost no resemblance to what the founders intended. Look at this map of Washington, D.C., and you'll see something fascinating. For every single member of Congress, there are roughly 9 lobbyists. 9. That means your representative isn't just hearing from you and your neighbors. They're hearing from teams of highly trained professionals whose entire job is to convince them to vote a certain way. And these aren't ordinary citizens. These are people with budgets, resources, and access that ordinary people could never dream of having. In 2023 alone, over $3.5 billion was spent on federal lobbying in the United States. $3.5 billion. That's not chump change. That's serious money designed to influence serious policy. And that's just a federal lobbying. When you add state and local lobbying into the mix, the number skyrockets even higher. So when you're wondering why certain laws get passed and others don't, when you're confused about why your interests seem to always lose out to corporate interests, this is a huge part of the answer. Now here's where it gets interesting. Lobbyists don't just show up and ask for favors. They operate with sophisticated strategies and playbooks that have been refined over decades. One of the most common tactics is something called grassroots lobbying, which sounds nice, but is actually pretty manipulative when you dig into it. Basically, a corporation or special interest group will hire a firm to create the appearance of public support for their position. They'll organize letter-writing campaigns, set up fake citizen groups, and flood social media with posts that make it seem like ordinary people care deeply about their issue. But here's the catch. Most of those ordinary people don't even know they're being manipulated. They're being fed talking points and emotional appeals designed to make them feel like they're part of a movement. It's not grassroots at all. It's astroturf. It's fake grass made to look real. And this isn't some theoretical concept. Let me give you a real example. Back in 2009, the health insurance industry was facing the possibility of a public option being included in the Affordable Care Act. This would have given people an alternative to private insurance. The industry spent millions creating something called Patients United Now, which appeared to be a grassroots organization of regular Americans concerned about healthcare. But it was actually funded and coordinated by insurance companies and their lobbying firms. They created fake Facebook pages, organized rallies, and generated thousands of letters to Congress. Most people who participated thought they were part of an authentic movement. They had no idea they were being used as props in a multi-million-dollar lobbying campaign. And guess what? It worked. The public option didn't make it into the final version of the Affordable Care Act. The insurance industry won, and regular Americans lost, all because of a sophisticated lobbying campaign disguised as grassroots activism. Another major tactic is something called the revolving door. This is where former government officials and staffers leave their government jobs and immediately go to work for lobbying firms. Suddenly they're using their relationships, their inside knowledge, and their understanding of how government actually works to influence the very agencies they just left. It's completely legal, and it happens all the time. A senator's chief of staff leaves office and becomes a lobbyist. A regulatory official retires from the EPA and starts working for an energy company. They know exactly who to call, what to say, and how to navigate the system. They've got credibility because they used to be on the inside, and they've got relationships that money alone can't buy. Consider this. According to a 2021 study by the Project on Government Oversight, roughly 50% of former members of Congress become lobbyists after they leave office. 50%. That's not a coincidence. That's a pipeline. These people spend years in government building relationships, learning how the system works, and developing expertise in specific policy areas. Then they cash in on all of that. And here's the thing that really matters. When they become lobbyists, they're not just using their knowledge. They're using their relationships with people who are still in government. They can pick up the phone and call their old colleagues. They can get meetings that ordinary citizens could never get. They can leverage personal relationships to influence policy in ways that are completely invisible to the public. Then there's direct lobbying, which is what most people think of when they hear the word lobbyist. This is when a professional advocate meets directly with elected officials or their staff to persuade them on specific legislation. They might provide research, they might offer amendments to bills, they might explain why a particular policy would be beneficial for the official's district. And here's the thing, a lot of this is actually helpful information. Legislators are busy. They can't possibly be experts on every single issue that comes before them. So they rely on lobbyists to provide information and analysis. The problem is that this information is always filtered through the lens of whoever is paying for it. You're not getting objective analysis. You're getting a carefully constructed argument designed to support a particular outcome. It's information, yes, but it's information designed to manipulate. Before we go deeper into how this actually shapes policy, I want you to think about something. How many of these tactics have you experienced without even realizing it? Have you ever signed an online petition that felt spontaneous, but was actually part of a coordinated campaign? Have you ever shared something on social media that was actually created by a professional marketing firm? Have you ever felt like your voice didn't matter in politics? Well, there's a reason for that. And that's exactly why you need to keep watching. Because once you understand how this system works, you can start to see through it. You can recognize manipulation when it's happening. And most importantly, you can start to push back. So if you're ready to understand the real levers of power in our world, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this. Now let's zoom out across the globe and look at the bigger picture of how lobbying actually shapes real policy. Let's talk about a concrete example that affects millions of people: the pharmaceutical industry. This is one of the most heavily lobbied industries in the world, and there's a reason for that. Drugs are expensive, really expensive. And the pharmaceutical companies want to keep it that way because that's how they make their money. So they invest massive amounts into lobbying efforts to prevent price controls, to extend drug patents, and to block generic medications from entering the market. In the United States, the pharmaceutical industry spends more on lobbying than any other industry except for insurance. They have teams of lobbyists working in Congress, in state legislatures, and in regulatory agencies like the FDA. They fund think tanks that produce research supporting their positions. They donate to politicians who support their agenda. And the result? Americans pay 2 to 3 times more for medications than people in other developed countries. That's not an accident. That's the direct result of lobbying efforts that have successfully convinced legislators that the current system is the best system. Now think about what that means for you. If you or someone you love has diabetes or cancer or any chronic condition, you're paying more for your medications because of lobbying. Your insurance premiums are higher because of it. Your taxes are higher because of it. And there's literally nothing you can do about it as an individual, because the system is designed to favor the people with the deepest pockets. Let me give you a specific example of how this works in practice. In 2003, Congress passed the Medicare Modernization Act, which created Medicare Part D, the prescription drug benefit. Sounds good, right? Except there was a catch. The law specifically prohibited Medicare from negotiating drug prices with pharmaceutical companies. Why would Congress do that? Well, the pharmaceutical industry spent over $100 million lobbying on that bill. They had hundreds of lobbyists working on it. And they won. They got exactly what they wanted. The result is that American seniors pay more for their medications than seniors in any other developed country. A drug that costs $100 in Canada costs $300 in the United States. That's not because the drug is better or the healthcare system is better. It's because the pharmaceutical industry successfully lobbied to prevent price negotiations. And every single year, millions of Americans have to choose between buying their medications and paying their rent or buying food. That's the real-world consequence of lobbying. You could point to the financial industry, which spent billions lobbying to deregulate banks in the decades leading up to 2008, which then crashed the economy and cost millions of people their homes. The Glass-Steagall Act, which separated commercial banking from investment banking, and was a key protection that prevented the kind of reckless behavior that caused the financial crisis, was repealed in 1999, largely because of lobbying by major financial institutions. Banks wanted to be able to engage in riskier activities, and they hired armies of lobbyists to convince Congress to let them do it. The result was the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. Millions of people lost their homes. Unemployment skyrocketed, the economy contracted, and the people who caused it? Most of them faced no consequences. In fact, many of them got bonuses, while the rest of us paid for the bailout. You could point to the fossil fuel industry, which has spent decades and billions of dollars lobbying to delay climate action and spread doubt about climate science. We've known about climate change since the 1980s. We had the science. We had the solutions. But the fossil fuel industry spent over $100 million a year on lobbying and public relations to convince people that climate change wasn't real or wasn't caused by humans. They funded think tanks that produced research casting doubt on climate science. They donated to politicians who opposed climate legislation. And the result? We've wasted 40 years. We're now facing a climate crisis that's far worse than it would have been if we'd acted in the 1990s. And millions of people around the world are suffering the consequences through extreme weather, food insecurity, and climate displacement. You could point to the agriculture industry, which lobbies for subsidies that make junk food cheaper than healthy food, contributing to the obesity epidemic. The federal government spends about $38 billion a year subsidizing corn and soy, most of which ends up in processed foods and animal feed. Meanwhile, fruits and vegetables get almost no subsidies. The result is that a fast food burger is cheaper than a salad, a soda is cheaper than milk, and poor people who have less money to spend on food end up eating the cheapest calories, which are the most unhealthy. The agriculture industry lobbies hard to keep these subsidies in place because they profit from them. And the rest of us pay the price through higher healthcare costs and an obesity epidemic that costs the country over $150 billion a year in medical expenses. Every single industry does this. Every single one. They all have lobbyists working to tilt the playing field in their favor. So what does this mean for you and me? Well, here's the hard truth. The system is rigged, not in a way that's necessarily illegal, but in a way that's fundamentally unfair. When you have the ability to hire teams of professionals to influence policy, and most people don't, you have an enormous advantage. It's not a level playing field. It's a field that's been tilted so far that ordinary citizens are basically playing a different game. The people with money and power get to write the rules, and they write them in a way that benefits themselves. That's not how democracy is supposed to work. Democracy is supposed to be about one person, one vote. It's supposed to be about the idea that everyone's voice matters equally. But in reality, the person with $1 billion gets heard 1,000 times louder than the person with nothing. It's because we've allowed a system to develop where money is speech and corporations are people. We've allowed lobbying to become so powerful and so pervasive that it's basically the default way that policy gets made. But here's where the motivational part comes in, and I want you to really hear this. Just because the system is rigged doesn't mean you're powerless. In fact, understanding how the system works is the first step to changing it. There are things you can do. First, you can educate yourself and others. Share this video. Talk about lobbying. Make it part of the conversation. Most people don't even know this is happening at the scale that it is. Awareness is power. Second, you can support politicians who are actually fighting against the influence of money in politics. There are candidates and elected officials who refuse corporate donations and who actively work to limit lobbying influence. Vote for them, support them, make it clear that this matters to you. Third, you can join organizations that are working to reform the system. There are non-profits, advocacy groups, and grassroots movements dedicated to campaign finance reform. to transparency in lobbying, and to limiting the revolving door between government and industry. Get involved. Volunteer. Donate if you can. Fourth, you can demand transparency. Push your representatives to support legislation that requires full disclosure of lobbying efforts and spending. The more sunlight we shine on these activities, the harder it is for them to operate in the shadows. And finally, you can use your voice. Call your representatives, write letters, show up at town halls, make it clear that you're paying attention and that you expect them to represent you, not the lobbyists. Your voice might seem small, but it's not. When thousands of people use their voices, it becomes impossible to ignore. The system is rigged, but systems can be changed. They've been changed before, and they can be changed again. But it requires people who care enough to do something about it. So here's what I want you to do right now. First, subscribe to this channel, because we dive deep into these hidden systems of power on a regular basis. You need to understand how the world actually works, not how it's presented to you by mainstream media or by the people in power. Second, watch the next video in the series, where we're going to look at how campaign finance works and how money flows through the political system in ways that would shock you. It's connected to everything we've talked about today, and it's absolutely crucial that you understand it. And third, share this video with someone you care about. Seriously, send it to a friend, post it on social media, talk about it. The more people who understand how lobbying works, the more pressure we can put on the system to change. The system of influence that we've talked about today is real, it's powerful, and it's shaping the world we live in. But you're not powerless. You never were. You just needed to understand the game so you could start playing it better. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.